Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and this is Book 20 of Lindsey Davis's Marcus Didius Falco series, and Book 20 is the last book. I don't know if Lindsey Davis is still alive because I didn't actually check, but what I can tell you is that there were a series of losses in her life at the time that this book was finally published, and from what I can tell, she basically seemed to have said, this is going to put a cap on the series, and while it might someday be revisited, the thing was that it's meant to round things up, to sort of tie off some loose threads and maybe even create a sense of the arc. A particular arc has been finished in Falco's life. So this book, it opens with the pregnancy that Helena had in the last couple books, ending in, not in a stillbirth, but she gives birth to a son and he dies, within hours. And so the two of them have just lost a child when this book opens. And when Falco goes over to his father's place to check up on some things, to get some things, to find out why his father, who normally, as he puts it, finds any sort of crisis or sad happening and shows up to insert himself into the proceedings, his father somehow didn't know to show up, and it turns out that the reason his father didn't was because his father has also just died. And Falco is extremely, extremely torn about this because, as we know right from the start, from the very first book, he's had a very long and combative relationship with his father because his father cheated on Falco's mother. He basically abandoned the kids and barely sent them any money, and they kind of just had to grow up on their own. And Marcus is the pater familias in lieu of his father because his father abandoned his duties and because Falco's brother managed to get himself killed. And so he's wound up in this position even though he shouldn't have to be. And so it's it's particularly upsetting to him because this has been happening all this time, because his father has been a cheat and a liar and manipulator for so long, so that even when he seems to be openly affectionate to his son, he's still much of the time just using him. And so on the one hand, his father died, and it's not that he has a genuine violent hatred for his father. You can see in moments, in bits in these books, the times when they get along, when they fit together, when the fact that they are from the same family comes through. But at the same time, he has a lot of extremely rational and deserved anger at his father. And so this death it's problematic, and it's problematic in that way that always comes up when you lose somebody in your life who is supposed to be very important to you, with whom you have an extremely mixed relationship, that you feel some sorrow but not enough sorrow, and a certain amount of guilt for the fact that you don't feel as bad as you probably should, along with a sense of defiance that I don't care because I feel how I feel and I don't feel that bad because... But then, it cycles a lot. And I can say this because I had an extremely mixed relationship with my mother, not in a love-hate sort of way, but you can find some traces and hints of this in my Memorial to My Mother series, by the way. Hey, look at me, self-advertising. If you go over there, you'll hear some of my mixed thoughts about her. The big thing was that with my mother, she developed psychiatric issues when I was a teenager and never fully recovered, and in a way I never got to know her as an adult because around the time that I would have been making the transition to adulthood, I became her caregiver in a lot of ways, and it was an extremely it made the relationship fraught in some very specific ways that meant that I lost her a lot sooner than I actually lost her, so to speak. And so when she died in 2019, I had some very, very mixed feelings and a certain amount of mixed guilt about the fact that I didn't feel worse because I should. But I didn't, because to me, I had already half lost her, and so this was more like stage 2 of a loss rather than a full loss, and it complicates things whenever you have complicated relationships, and Falco is suffering that. And then an investigation, he gets called in while he's trying to deal with the fact that his father's significant amount of wealth has now fallen into his lap, that a friend of his, because Thalia comes back and had an affair with Falco's father, Geminus, and she's now pregnant, and the baby is a half-sibling and may need to inherit something, and, and he's got all of this. He's dealing with the estate, he's dealing with the fact that Helena is, not surprisingly, suffering from depression because she gave birth and the baby died, so she's trying to sort of cope with this, and Falco is doing things. There is a wonderful, delicate moment, because in Rome, babies are given, and this would, I suspect, come culturally out of having a very, very high infant mortality rate. Babies are given relatively short shrift. They don't get, proper funerals and so on because they weren't named, because they were, in effect, it's sort of like they aren't ensouled, haven't been baptized, whatever, however you want to think of it. The point is, not that Romans did baptisms as far as I'm aware, but the point is that the baby hadn't had a chance to be sort of declared a full person, and so they can't give him, a proper funeral, even. And so what's delightful, well, not delightful, but it's a wonderfully moving moment when Falco, his father, it's at his father's funeral, and they're setting up for the cremation, and, they're doing all the various rituals for making sure that a person, going into the afterlife will go in fully, and it's a wonderful, touching moment that when his father is cremated, what Falco does effectively to ensure that his son gets something like a funeral, some sort of proper thing, that he's not just going to bury the kid under, under the cornerstone of a building or any other such thing. He puts the baby's body on the pyre with his father, so that his son, who he nonetheless chooses to name, effectively is, as he put it, carried into the afterlife in his grandfather's arms. So it's affecting, and it's, in a way, it's clever because it ensures that the baby has been given last rites that he couldn't otherwise have. So that one is very touching. Anyway, so in the midst of all of this, Falco and his friend Petro get called in by Laeta, who is one of the flunkies over in the palace, who basically, there are a lot of people in the palace who don't particularly like Falco, but will take advantage of his skills, and Falco knows that they're doing this, and he doesn't really like them, but he needs the money, or at least he used to. With his father, who was extremely wealthy, having died and left everything to his son, he's suddenly got large amounts of money at hand. He even winds up making the wisecrack that, people, everybody knew that I was poor. I had no money to give anybody. Are you saying your brothers are going to start coming to me asking for money, aren't they? Because while his wife is a patrician, is of a noble family, they're a not particularly well-off noble family. And, and Falco is sort of having to get used to the fact that they now have, like, household staff and, people who will hold out a bowl of water for him to wash his hands in between courses and all kinds of things, and it's really weird for him. Because, he was staying at the start of this, he's in a terrible, cheap apartment in a really bad part of town, and, he has really, really moved up in the world. Anyway, so you have, so they get dragooned into investigating a particular series of murders, and then along comes, our good friend, the spymaster, and, he's been a thorn in Falco's side. He's been a problem for Falco. He assaulted Falco's sister. Anacrates is really, he's terrible, and he hit on Marco's sister, Maya, and she, has been terrified ever since because he sent goons to wreck up her house. Anyways, Anacrates shows up, pulls the rug out from under them, takes the case back, and Falco and Petro go on to resolve the case anyways. And you have this, and it's a case where they're searching serial killers, but not just any serial killers. This is like that traditional backwoods yokel redneck family that murders people. This is like people like in that episode of Supernatural where, like, Sam and Dean thinks that it's demons or some sort of supernatural thing, and instead it's just a bunch of rednecks living out in the woods who just, like, hunt people down and kill them. And these guys are very much that. They're horrific. They're vile human beings who murder people because they didn't like them, or because they felt like it, or because, well, we happen to be here and we like chopping things off of people. They're the kinds of boys who in retrospect you realize they would have turned out as a psychopath because they're the kind of boys who tortured puppies when they were kids. They're really horrifying, and they've been committing these murders, and in the end, this all culminates in Falco and Petro getting the revenge on Anacrates that they swore that time that Anacrates had, like, assaulted and harassed and terrified Falco's sister. And it's really, really fascinating because Anacrates has always been kind of a weird back and forth character, because at first you just don't like him because he's sneaky, but at the same time he keeps on saying things and doing things that come across as sympathetic, like that time that Domitian, the emperor's younger son, refuses Falco the chance to move up a rank from plebeian into the middle rank, into equestrian, and he does it just because he can. And Falco, had been promised by the emperor that if he gets things together, like gets the amount of money and land together that he needs to move up, that the emperor will expedite it. And then when he is forced to go to Domitian instead of directly to the emperor, he gets shut down, and Anacrates, has pulled him over and said, they can't do that. It can't just turn you down. If you've got all of the things in place, you should be on the list. And so he's always been a weirdly back and forth character, but this one sort of, it pushes it into clarity. It clarifies Anacrates into somebody who is in some ways horrible, and in some ways is just making the gestures without really understanding the meaning of it. And I suspect we'll never be able to truly tell if he was a psychopath or just ill-used by the system, but it's a very interesting closer in the end. So yeah, it's an interesting end, this book. Still recommend it. It's a lot darker than the others, though, word of warning. But that's everything, and I'll see you all next week.